You want me to talk about the long-term trends that have led to this concern about the work of the future and about that. And I think that's a good place to start. What's led to the concern is the fact that, after all, the labor market is the main way we have of distributing income. Historically, it might not have worked out that way. We might still be farmers. But we get income to most of the people in the country through jobs and paychecks. And over the years, over the last 30, 40 years, you know better than I, as productivity has increased in the old days, wages kept up with productivity, and the arithmetic says that the share of the national income that went to wages and salaries was about the same over time. In the last 30, 40 years, those two numbers have diverged, and productivity has continued to increase, not sensationally, but it has increased generally, leaving aside the virus and the pandemic, which is a problem in itself. But real wages, the real return to labor, has not kept up. The paths have diverged. Because at the same time as all wages and salaries as a share of income have fallen away from productivity, there's been an explosion of executive salaries, of very high income. The data count executive salaries as wages and salaries, as if these were payment for ordinary work, whereas I think if you think about it for a minute, it's pretty clear that big executive salaries are a form of profit sharing. It's a form in which a large firm, if it has a very highly paid executive, shares its rent, shares its net surplus with its executives. And the fact that so much of it is stock options and things like that just confirms that fact. Ordinary wages, the wages of the ordinary worker in retail sales or an office or something like that, must have been doing even worse than the raw data suggest. That, I think, is the key thing that the Commission has to address. It's whether people in the street who think about the end of work and all that realize it or not. What's really bugging them at bottom is the fact that they're not seeming to share in the prosperity that improved technology has got us. This is a really important insight, because when you start worrying about the end of work, you think of the labor market. But the sources of the real problem, the failure of our system to distribute income to people who work generally, those failures can occur anywhere in the system. They don't have to be located in the labor market. I think that it's important to realize, as economists, including yours truly, have in the past not really recognized, that much of the value added of corporations in the U.S., essentially the GDP, is what economists call rent. It's a return bigger than is really needed to get whatever the return is to do its job. Large corporations have started reducing the share of their rents that they give to their wage and salary workers. One of the reasons they're able to do this is the decay of collective bargaining. And with the loss of collective bargaining, enterprises are able to keep more of the rent for themselves. The economics profession has no decent estimate of the share of the national income that consists of rent. Some of the national income is market wages and salaries, some is the market return to capital, and the rest is this rent. And we don't know whether that's 5%, 10%, or 20%, or 30% of the national income. And if I were 50 years younger, I'd be working on that. And over the last 30 years, there was a hardening of attitudes toward rent sharing with workers. That source of wage and salary income has been cut back. And I think that is a large part of what, it's not the only thing, that this same factor about rent sharing and the size of rent sharing might have something to do with David's famous discovery of what I think is called the hollowing out of the middle of the wage distribution. Those people in the middle of the wage distribution, the people with decent jobs and regular jobs, were logical candidates to share in the rent of the firm. And if a firm can instead replace that sort of person with a low-wage worker, the sort of person who can be found more easily anywhere, they will do that. And I think that that may be one of the factors in the fact that the bottom of the wage distribution has grown relative to the middle of the wage distribution. There's room for a lot of ingenuity here because since the nature of employment has changed as we've become a service economy rather than a goods-producing economy, there's room for innovation in how to organize union work. But we need a little ingenuity in how to organize workers. Working from home, the virus is no friend of collective bargaining. You can say that. But another thought, by the way, is, and this is an example of how you can approach what looks like a labor market problem outside the labor market, a more active enforcement of the antitrust laws. Try to increase the degree of competition in the production of goods and services would also have the effect of improving the prospects for wages and salaries in the value added that corporations create. The sort of ice cream of this sort of thing is always more training, better training, and God knows I'm all for that. But it's not clear to me what better skill training would do would alter the distribution of wages very much. We discovered all over the world, in Asia, in Latin America, and elsewhere, an enormous supply of low-wage work. And so wages have been competed down. Quantitatively, how much this has meant, I don't know. It's a hard problem, but I think it has meant something. You can find, I'm sure, examples where a technological innovation, particular technological innovation, a large one, has an effect on the distribution of employment by skills. But there are these things on both sides, and creating new occupations, destroying occupations, that make me think that it's probably the main factor in this disturbance in the distribution of incomes is probably not technological change. I do think that if we had some way of directing the innovation process, which is a mysterious thing, directing it not with respect to the labor market, but simply asking, what does society need that will make people better off? That would be useful, but it's a hard thing to do. I was impressed many years ago. I was on a science advisory committee for the General Motors Corporation. We were organized through the General Motors research labs, but I was fascinated to see how much of what counted as innovation, as an increase in total factor productivity, came not from research people at all, but from people on the shop floor. You could attach the bumper to the car with half the number of bolts you put in it now, and it would be just as secure. Well, that's an improvement in productivity. My goal would be, with respect to directed technological change, to the extent that that can be done at all, would not be particularly aimed at its job consequences, but simply aimed at social benefit consequences. How the society distributes income. I mean, the mechanism that it uses for doing that is a matter of choice, social choice. It's a hard social choice. And we have done, over the past several hundred years, very well with buying and selling labor. Put it this way, the neoclassical economist who thinks that capital should be taxed zero, if pressed, will have to agree that he or she is looking toward a personal income tax of a degree of progressivity that we're not going to get. I agree with the position that I don't know whether we subsidize capital too much, but we subsidize workers too little. Put it that way. Childcare is a good example of that, and in many parts of the world, although not in the U.S., or even in the U.S., healthcare is another such example. There's a question that's hovering over everything we have discussed that we haven't discussed, and I don't think we can discuss, and that is the politics of all this. What is really doable in our, well, we'll know more on November 3rd for sure, but I think it's a longer run issue than that. How you deal politically with social changes that change the balance of power itself. That's way beyond me.